Hello CS112, so I'll be going over a quick solution to Lab 12, which has to do with objects-oriented programming or classes. Now, we are to create a class called student record, which had two names attributes that you would be passing through, as well as a couple other attributes that we would need to initialize in our init function. Now, why would we want to create a class? Well, we want to be able to have custom data types. So in Python, you have an integer which has properties, you have a string which has properties, and Python knows what all these properties are. Well, you're gonna want to be able to create your own special types of custom data types. In this case, we want to create a student record that has a student name, a student ID. I apologize if you can hear my cat. You need to have a midterm, a final, and a lab grade as well, all associated with a student record data type. So as you can see here, to create a students, you want to set a variable equal to the class name followed by parentheses and the variables from the init function. This is a reserved function that initializes your data type. This self variable is an extremely important one that we'll talk more about in a sec. But to initialize it, you don't need to worry about the self, you just need to worry about the variables that come after it. And to properly create the init function, you will say self.studentName equals student name. Self.student ID equals student ID. And then for the midterm, let's start with lab. So self.lab, I'm just going to set that equal to 0 because we were told to initialize it to 0. Self.midterm equals 0 and self.final equals 0. So now what does this self mean? Why are we doing this? It seems very redundant. Well, this self is referring to the actual student record that is being initialized. So for instance, you see how we have a students variable of type student record. We have a person variable of type student record. This self in the initializer is making sure that it's essentially saying student, when student calls the init function, it's students.studentName equals the student name that we passed in. Students.student ID is equal to the student ID we passed in. And when we create this down here, it's going to say person.student name equals the student name we passed here. So the self refers to the variable or whatever name you give the data type that is calling or being created. That is what self is for, and it's very important that you include that and get comfortable using that. So this is just a very, kind of boilerplate how you would define it. Again, this is 2 underscores, init, 2 underscores. This is the init function. You need it for your classes. So now let's just do update mid. So update mid, you literally just set the midterm grade. So you can say self.midterm equals midterm. And again, this self is just saying, okay, well, student is calling update mid, so this students.midterm equals this new midterm score that we are calling in. And the other code is going to be the exact same. This lab. And then calculate total, you were just to add everything up. So you can just say return self.lab plus self.midterm plus self.final. Okay. So now when we're running this, we should get the expected output, but I can go through it a little slower just so we can see what's going on here. So we get 90, 70, 95, 3300. So 90, 70, 95, 3300. Okay. So we did get the expected output, but now let's talk about what's happening. So all these are pretty much the same, but I am just going to let's talk about Shanaz here because that is one of the professors. So what's happening here is you create a new type of data type called of type student record with the name Shanaz, and then I believe it's what is this ID of G12345. Then you're going to set the midterm grade of this new data type here to 100. Then you're going to set new dot update final to 100, the lab to 100, and then calculate total. You're just adding all of them up. So it was pretty straightforward. However, before I end this video, since this was, this is all you needed to do, I am going to talk about a couple of other things, and we have been talking about this in the final exam review sessions, but it has to do with introducing two more functions to the class, which are also similar to this init. It's one of those boilerplate ones that has, the tuple underscore, stuff like that. The first is how can we compare two students? So let's just delete all but two. So we'll keep student and Shanaz here. So how can I compare these two people? What would happen if I were to, let's say, print new equals student? How can I actually compare them? And let's say that these were the exact same people. So I'm just going to modify this real quick. And then let's give everybody 100, because why not? Okay, so when running this code, or when comparing these two objects here, you might think to yourself, well, you can totally compare these two guys, right? Like they're the exact same. They're just different variables. So for instance, this is like saying x equals 2 and y equals 2, y equals x, right? Because they all have the exact same thing. But let's see what happens when we print new equals students. Okay. You get false. So I'm actually going to comment out the calculate total just so we only get the output we're looking for. So yes, we get false. So this is because Python has no idea what a student record data type is. We can't compare like what a student record is. That makes no sense to it. So to actually compare two custom data types, we would need to create the ec function here and give it self and other. The self refers to the calling, so in this case new, and the student would represent the other. And what we would need to do in here is return and then compare every single one of these attributes. So if self.lab is equal to other.lab and self.final is equal to other.final and self.midterm is equal to other.midterm. And also, you would also want to check is it just name, student name? It's getting a little long here, but you would want to check every single one of these to make sure they are the same. So other.student name. And what's the last thing? Is a student ID? It is. And self.student ID is equal to other.student ID. So this is how you can actually compare to see if two custom objects are the same. I'm just going to go ahead and split this up real quick, just so we can all see it in one line here. But yes, when you have a class and you want to compare it to another object of the same class, you do need to check every single one of the attributes, because each of these attributes, Python knows what they are, right? Because student name is a string, student ID is a string, lab is an integer. It can compare integers with each other. So self.lab is going to equal other.lab, self.final equals other.final, so on and so forth. So now if we were to run this code, it would now be true. When this comparison operator is used between two custom data types, it will look in this class for the ec function and it will implement it. So for instance, if we were to change this to somebody else, it would now return false, because sure, everything else is true except this would not be, because self, which is Shanaz dot student name, does not equal the other dot student name, which is Zaman. So that's a good function to know. This is the ec function. It's also one of those reserved functions like init. And the very last function I'd like to talk about that was kind of outside of this lab is how to actually print an object. So if I was to just say, let's print out students. I'm just going to get rid of this guy now. Let's say I just wanted to print out students. What do you guys think will pop up on the console? Well, let's find out. If I run this file, we get a location in memory. So this is another one of those classic examples, because Python has no idea what a student record is. Again, it only knows things like strings and integers and how to represent those when you're printing them. If you want to actually have some human readable stuff, you are going to have to create a string function, so an str function, and just pass in self. And then here you would just return an f string where you can say like name and then student, or self dot student name. And I mean, you can really just add whatever you want here. So I'm just going to, for the sake of time, I'm just going to do the name and the ID. But you do need to return a string here, you know, just so you can actually see. So just so it's human readable, it's not just the location of memory, because this means nothing to us. Let's be real here. So now if we were to run that, you would get, when you would print it, it would first search for the str function to kind of get a representation of it that is more comfortable and human readable. It actually means something. And yeah, I hope this helped. I hope these two functions kind of help you gain a better understanding of how to work with classes. If you have any questions, let us know.